Han Wei is going to be the moderator, partially, be the moderator. Also very important, he's going to bring up the themes of this conversation. So Han Wei, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jean. It's my great pleasure then to be part of the event, and it's really good to co-organize this wonderful webinar with the Private International Interest Group. Let me start by introducing our three speakers today. We have Professor Anupam Chandra from University of Georgetown, and many of you may have already heard about the Professor Chandra's excellent work, and he is really well known globally in terms of like a data governance, and I really have been following his work closely for the past, should I say, decade. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you guys will enjoy his talk on a very topical issues, TikTok. And our second speaker is Miss Park Nguyen. She is currently a visiting scholar at Harvard Law School, and she's also a PhD student at Monash University here in Australia. She's focusing on cyber regulations from the Vietnamese perspective. We have heard lots of research interest going on in China already, but we need more different focuses like in other part of Asia, especially the emerging economies like Vietnam, which is pretty much another powerhouse in the near future. And finally, we have Dr. Phoebe Lee, who is the leader of Sussex University in United Kingdom. And she, like me, we originally from Taiwan as well. And she will be talking about the national securities and how national security shapes digital sovereignty and from the perspective of middle power countries. Without further ado, let's welcome three speakers, especially our speaker, Professor Anupam Chandra. Professor Chandra, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Han Wei. And thank you to the American Society of International Law and the University of Sydney for sponsoring this event. I'm delighted to have a chance to speak with you. I'm going to talk to you about some history. It's recent history, but it's easy to forget. And you may not, and I'm going to contextualize it within American politics, because I think that context is important. But it's a legal story as well. And so I'm going to tell you a story about law and politics, and refresh your memories of what happened in the year 2020, just a couple of years ago. Let me share my screen. Okay. Sorry, one second here. Okay, so this is the title of this presentation is Trump v. TikTok. As you know, there are different views of the TikTok app. The company's founder, Zhang Yiming, says TikTok is a window to look into a bigger world. Republican Senator Josh Hawley, on the other hand, calls TikTok a Trojan horse. And as you're aware, at the start of August in 2020, the President of the United States declared that TikTok was going to be banned from the United States, and in fact issued emergency declarations of national security that said that TikTok would be banned within 45 days. Initially, he announced it was just a TikTok ban, but when the orders came down, they included WeChat as well. So WeChat became collateral damage to the TikTok ban. And so we know what happened. TikTok survived, in fact, becoming the world's most visited website in 2021 and the world's most downloaded app in the first few months of 2022 and beyond. TikTok reported more than 1 billion monthly users in the world, and 100 million or so active users in the United States. And so the great irony of this was that instead of Trump banning TikTok, it was TikTok that banned the presidents of the United States videos on the app. So how did a Chinese-owned big tech company beat the president of the United States on his home turf? That's the story I want to tell. I should note that this is based on some other reading that you can do. So there's a paper I published in the Vanderbilt Journal of Transnational Law called Trump v. TikTok, on which this is drawn. It's related to other work that I've just published in the University of Chicago Law Review, co-authored with Paul Schwartz at Berkeley, and definitely related to my general concerns about global technologies expressed in the book, The Electronic Silk Road, which is available for free and online. So you can download the PDF. Trump bans TikTok. But before we get to Trump banning TikTok, let's come to that summer of 2020. Trump said, "I have the best words, now they're hers." So every few days on the TikTok app, a comedian named Sarah Cooper would satirize Donald Trump using his own words. So here she is applying bleach and cleaning herself of pandemic. He suggested ingesting bleach, and so she mimicked that in this video. The video is hilarious. I do encourage you to watch all Sarah Cooper videos. They're really fun. So this would be every few days another humiliation for the president, now using his own words. Sarah Cooper didn't lip sync songs; she lip synced to the president's words, just showing how ridiculous they were. And then came the final blow. In June of that year, the BTS army sprung to life using TikTok. And they claimed tickets to a huge Trump rally, leaving that rally half empty in reality. Trump himself said, "I have 1 million people who want tickets to my rally. This is how popular I am." When he showed up, the hall was half empty because teenagers mostly and BTS fans had reserved those seats. So it wasn't that surprising then that he banned TikTok. TikTok had become a thorn in his side. A newspaper or a publisher that was largely creating problems for Donald Trump. And it was the one massive social media app in the United States on which he and his supporters did not rely. In fact, it was a source of annoyance, not fundraising or public support. And then he would say things like, "I don't mind whether it's Microsoft or someone else, a big company, a secure company, a very American company that buys TikTok." This is not the way that American presidents have typically spoken about mergers and acquisitions in the United States. The U.S., Trump said, would obtain a finder's fee from the sale. A very large percentage of the sale price should be coming to the Treasury, because he had, of course, brokered the sale. So he wanted a chunk of change from the sale of TikTok to an American buyer. This group, Center for Democracy and Technology's general counsel, called it protection money. Microsoft, in fact, referenced the benefits to the US Treasury, but it noted that it would provide proper economic benefits to the United States, including the United States Treasury. An odd choice of words in this context, but worried, I think, that it would be seen as providing protection money to the US government. Now, Microsoft turned out not to be an ideal suitor. It may be because there was an alternative suitor, Larry Ellison, who founded the Oracle company. Trump, when the possibility of Oracle becoming the acquirer became known, he called Oracle a great company. I certainly think that Oracle can handle it. And the New York Times reported that Oracle was run by a prominent ally of Mr. Trump. Oracle CEO Safra Catz was the only major tech executive to join the executive committee of the Trump administration's transition team. Later on, we would note, this is much later on, that November, after the November 2020 election, Larry Ellison, the person pictured here, participated in a conference call focusing on strategies for contesting the legitimacy of the vote. There is reason that Donald Trump may have preferred Larry Ellison running this massive social media app. And of course, in any international affair, you can't imagine that other countries sit still. And China responded. China called Trump's actions a smash and grab, an officially sanctioned steal of Chinese technology, turning US claims and protests about Chinese IP acquisition against the United States. China called on the US to earnestly maintain fair and transparent international rules and order. And crucially, the Chinese ministries expanded restrictions on technology exports to cover algorithms, content moderation, content recommendation algorithms, giving them a veto on any potential sale. Now, let's turn to the courts. The first move in this context was users of WeChat. WeChat users brought a lawsuit in San Francisco, in the Northern District of California. Their magistrate judge ruled in their favor. They said that she concluded that the WeChat ban would violate the plaintiffs, the WeChat users' First Amendment rights. And she noted in that context possible anti-Chinese animus motivating the order. If you just imagine, here she's sitting in Northern District of California, in the epicenter of where the Korematsu decision was emanated from, and here she's, which was motivated, of course, by anti-Japanese animus. She is keeping in mind the possibility of anti-Chinese animus. She notes that he called it the China flu. He mocked the people on racial lines. And so she noted that there could be a possibility of anti-Chinese animus motivating this order. Now, enter two other judges. Here, they were focused on the TikTok ban. Judge Wendy Beadlestone in Pennsylvania, and another federal judge, Carl Nichols, here in Washington, D.C., where I live. In two separate cases, the first case is the more amusing one because it was brought by TikTok influencers. So the plaintiff here is one of the TikTok influencers, but there were three TikTok influencers, and two of them are featured here. They brought suit against Donald Trump. Shuttering TikTok would, in fact, shut down plaintiffs' influencing activities, the court held. So your influencing activities are important, according to US federal courts. And the court noted that the president's power to ban economic transactions emanated from a statute that excluded any right to ban informational materials directly or indirectly. And the court concluded that this effort to ban TikTok was an effort to ban or regulate or prohibit directly or indirectly informational materials, and thus was ultra virus. With respect to the national security concerns that the government proclaimed, it said they were hypothetical. And both judges, Judge Beetlestone and Judge Nichols, made the same conclusion. The specific evidence of the threat posed by plaintiffs remains less substantial, even if there is a serious national security risk emanating from China generally. The relationship to this app is either hypothetical or the evidence less substantial. So that's what happened in those cases. Now, however, there is a separate executive order. This one is based on a different statutory basis. This is the CFIUS order. That order was never adjudicated in courts. TikTok filed a claim against it, but it never has been tried in court because the government has entered into negotiations over the last 2.5 years to try to figure out how to satisfy the TikTok's national security concerns, that national security concerns raised by TikTok. Now, generally, to conclude here in a minute, the pointing to foreign influences in national media is a well-worn tactic. We see that with, so here's just some recent examples of this. Duterte claims Rappler fully owned by Americans, claiming that the publication that Maria Reza, a Nobel laureate, owned, was really a vehicle for American influence. We saw this with respect to Twitter in Nigeria, when the president there declared that Twitter would be banned. The mission of Twitter in Nigeria is very suspicious. And ultimately, the TikTok affair represents the Trump administration's ill-considered relinquishment of US leadership of the free and open internet. And that, I think, will be a lasting legacy of that move. And it's one that I think we could possibly compound today. We can talk about what's going on in Congress and in state houses during Q&A, but I think right now, my suspicion is that there will be no real TikTok ban, that TikTok will be permitted and will not be forced to be sold to an American company. That's my prediction. We'll see what happens. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and we can come back and talk some more. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Anupam. Your topic is really tiny because actually last month in Australia, we have 2 federal government agencies actually banned their staff members to use TikTok on their work phone. So I guess we probably have quite a number of questions on this issue. And now let's move to our colleagues and PhD candidate, Mr. Lan-Yuan Ha. She's going to talk about the cybersecurity issues in Vietnam. So Ha, the floor is yours. Ha?
Yes, give me one second.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Jean. Can I double check that you can hear me just fine?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, so thank you for the organizer of this event. The topic of the event is particularly fitting with my current research. So I will start with describing a nationwide conflict over cybersecurity in Vietnam. So this conflict began in May 2018 when the National Assembly, which is the legislative body of Vietnam, proposed a draft law on cybersecurity. So this mere proposal was met with oppositions from many different groups in Vietnam. It was an unprecedented event of tens of thousands of people took on the street to demonstrate their oppositions. As you would know, Vietnam is a one-party nation, so protest is highly regulated, and a lot of the time, in most cases, are illegal. Secondly, I've observed that other interest groups, such as enterprise groups, business groups, Chamber of Commerce in different nations have also joined to oppose this draft law on cybersecurity. So initially, my research looked at this conflict over the cybersecurity law, asking basic questions such as why did people protest and what did they want? However, as my research continued until today, 5 years later, I have observed that the conflict actually has not stopped. It wasn't a one-off event, but it has prolonged and continued until today. So when the cybersecurity law in Vietnam was passed in January 2019, human rights groups, foreign governments such as the US government have been continually expressing their oppositions and the criticisms of the cybersecurity law. After Vietnam passed this substantial piece of legislation, which was the first piece of law on cybersecurity itself, as well as a holistic regulation of cyberspace, the Vietnamese government drafted a decree number 53 to give instructions on how to implement the cybersecurity law. And as I have flagged, this decree, the drafting of the decree also met intense oppositions from the domestic and international community. There was criticism of data localizations requirements, the monitoring of content and surveillance of content that the government requires every stakeholder to hand over personal data whenever they suspect that there could be a breach of cybersecurity. Despite all of these oppositions, the decree was revised several times, and it was enacted last year in 2022. As you would predict, this conflict still continue until today. The matter of cybersecurity in Vietnam is highly contentious, both domestically and in international sphere. One of the reasons is because that Vietnam signed up to the CPTPP that requires all of the signatories to remove data localization requirements in Vietnam. This requirement in the cybersecurity law directly contradicted the requirement of the CPTPP. Another contentious aspect is the ICCPR. So the civil society and human rights group especially argue that the cybersecurity law severely violates the human rights, freedom of speech, and freedom of political expressions online. So how do we understand this conflict? My research was the first holistic research looking at issues of cyber regulation and cybersecurity in Vietnam. So my question was simple. Why has this conflict occurred in Vietnam, and why has it prolonged? I initially did consider a doctrinal perspective. However, doctrinal approach is limited in its ability to unveil non-state actors. What are their interests? How have they lobbied? What are the processes and factors that participated in the lawmaking and law reform of Vietnam cybersecurity? So I employed a discursive approach. Discourse here simply refers to all forms of spoken interactions, formal, informal, written texts that can unveil the social, political, economic, moral, and cultural components within the discourse. And the discourse analysis allows me to look at specific words, patterns, and linguistic strategies to understand implicit meaning that exhibited in the explicit language, and let me identify the narratives that people portray and identify themselves with, to understand how do they understand cyberspace, cybersecurity, and why have they responded Vietnamese cyber law in that way. So adopting this approach, I have a whole set of findings, but for this particular event, I thought these 3 findings are relevant and interesting. So the first one, when I first landed in Vietnam to do my field work, I realized that the term cybersecurity in Vietnamese is an enigma. The term itself is new. So when I ask people what comes to mind when you think of this term, most people, actually the majority, has not reflected on the term before, so that it only entered the Vietnamese discourse very recently, maybe 6 months to a year before Vietnam proposed the cybersecurity draft law. And because this is such a new term, I have to begin on the groundwork, asking people to describe cyberspace, cybersecurity, and looking at 51 interviews, a very large sets of social media content and relevant documentary, I've identified that there are actually 3 different interpretations of cybersecurity in the Vietnamese populations. And each interpretation is held by a concept that I term epistemic community. They're basically referring to groups, organizations, people, network who orientate towards the same epistem. That could be logic, modes of thinking, assumptions, and they all share the same interpretations of an event. So I will run through, I will briefly describe these 3 epistemic communities and their interpretations of cybersecurity in Vietnam. So the first community is the state epistemic communities. Interestingly, this community doesn't consist of only state actors that are government officials, members of the Vietnamese Communist Party who work in the government, but it also includes non-state actors who regularly consume state media. So they watch 7 p.m. televisions, they watch state documentaries, state films, they listen to the radio, they even follow the government, the Vietnamese government on YouTube and Facebook, for example. So both state and non-state actors, there's quite a large portions of them that made up in the representative sample that I have. And when I asked them, how do you describe cyberspace to someone who have never heard of this before? All members of the state epistemic communities conceptualize cyberspace as part of a state territory or state property. They metaphor cyberspace such as, a part of a house. So it could be like an extra deck or a roof that has been kind of added on to the house, which is the nation's. And that's why cybersecurity for them is very obviously a national security matter. And when asked how would they regulate the cybersecurity personally if they do get to choose, all members of this community preferred a command and control regulation of cybersecurity. So the table below is I want to demonstrate to you my analytical process. I look at the narrative that the interviewees have expressed to me, distill them down into several key assumptions behind those narratives. And through this process, I've actually identified that the state epistemic community in Vietnam have a very strong Confucianist ideology, which is unsurprising since Confucianism has entered Vietnamese state management for a long time now. And scholarly research has shown that they have continually resurfaced new issues. So the second group is the enterprise community. These are made up of domestic and foreign enterprises who participate in Vietnam's digital economy. So a lot of them are offshore, but they still participate in the discourse, they still do businesses, and they still have quite a crucial stake within the business community. They conceptualize cyberspace as a transnational information network that cannot be contained by national border. By nature, cyberspace for this community is a global network. And because of that, cybersecurity for them is the protections of open market and open competitions. And they believe that self-regulation is the ideal mode to maintain cybersecurity. So my kind of analytical process identified that this group is heavily resonant to the ideology of neoliberalism, which is unsurprising since cybersecurity industry has existed alongside the development of the internet, and it was a crucial aspect to the development of the digital economy. So if we go back to remembering the antiviral programs that used to pop up and demand updates all the time. So those are the kind of early day cybersecurity programs that formulate a certain sets of understanding and norms related to cybersecurity. The third group is the civil society epistemic community. So these are made up of foreign and domestic dissidents, activists, NGOs, workers, human rights, self-organizing groups even. And again, they operate, a lot of them operate online, so purely activism through an online space, but a lot of them do take the streets and do even network with a Southeast Asia kind of human rights advocacy. So they conceptualize cyberspace as a public space that is open to everyone and should belong to no one. And because of that, their interpretations of cybersecurity is a protections of individual right and safety. And they believe that a decentered mode of co-regulation would be the best mode to attain cybersecurity in Vietnam. Looking at these groups, I found that their ideology of liberalism is very much as resonant with the individuals in this group. However, liberalism itself is also an ambiguous ideology that embodied a series of different meanings and different types of thinking. So what are the key lessons to take away from my research so far? The first point that I thought was particularly salient to this event is the insight that national security, constructions of cybersecurity is actually a recent discourse. Recently in Vietnam, it was heavily politicized. So now cybersecurity is a political issue. But before that, it was a depoliticized activity and agenda in other domains, such as in the industries or in the social domains, when people participate in this online space or online sphere, and their sense of cybersecurity is to respond to the issues that they have encountered in the process. The second lesson that I thought was interesting was how function shapes norms. We see that these three different groups inherently have three different functions in societies, and the way that their function shapes their activities was translated into discourse. So, for example, governing functions shape the discourse of national security, while industry's function shapes this interest in open markets and open competitions. The third lessons from this research was the continuity of ideology. So I thought the point was interesting that these ideologies are quite old. So Confucianism, for example, have been transplanted in Vietnam for a very long time, but it remains relevant because it stayed in the thinking of lawmakers and Vietnamese politicians who have interpreted new phenomenon through old ideological lens. So one of my current hypotheses is that the conflict over cybersecurity in Vietnam is there's a part of it that stems from a conflict of ideologies, that people inherently think about these issues in a different ways. And part of that ideological construction is by rejecting the other side, if you like. So the next phase of my research at the moment is looking at the possibilities of whether these conflicts can be resolved. Can they be interacted in certain platforms that allows the differences in their views to converge and to be even reach a consensus? That's it for me. Thank you very much again for the opportunity, and please give me any questions if you do have any.
Thank you so much, Ha. Thank you. So we see here our speaker use different research methodology. So just now, Anupam, based on the case study, and Ha beautifully used the quantitative methods, which is the interview. Now our third speaker is Dr. Phoebe Lee. She's going to talk about how national security is shaping digital sovereignty, especially from the UK and Taiwan perspective. Phoebe, now the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Jean, for your invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to sit on the panel to discuss this topic from European, UK point of view. And basically, I want to talk about a little bit about post-Brexit. You know, national security has been a big issue, and especially after Brexit, we have economic security issues, and the government has been very keen to work with scholars, academics to figure out what should we do next. So I'm being involved in one of the funded project by the Research Council looking into post-Brexit trade deals. So in this project, we are looking into digital service trade and how can we do business with peoples around the globe, and how can we enlarge our value system to accommodate into our day-to-day life. And the other project I have been involved is earlier, before around pandemic time, is the government is also really keen to push forward AI sovereignty in the UK. So it has been claimed that UK have the leadership in AI industry, and it wants to really maintain this kind of world leadership in developing autonomous system, trustworthy autonomous system, and responsible and transparent autonomous system, and standard setting of this kind of AI system as a standard setter in the world. And in this project, we have been looking into specifically on the governance and regulation theme. So the project is led by multidisciplinary people group. We have informatics, computer science, we have philosopher and bioethicist and lawyers, including me. So we could look into different case studies, including industry partner, to set some of the benchmark and how do we design the AI system embedded some of the key values we've discussed in this project. So for the post-Brexit political situation, if you know, it's really chaotic. And recently, we still don't know how long this present prime minister will sit on his chair. But basically, it has been quite a lot of movement in terms of government strategy. But overall, in terms of digital strategy, we can see an ambition to really still regain the sovereignty from Brexit. So the government actually put forward last 2 years a pro-innovation contextual approach to regulating AI. So this is distinctive from the EU AI Act, which is putting forward a cross-sector approach. So government has all sorts of consultation and launch AI strategy or digital strategy. And looking into specifically, we are doing business with Indo-Pacific countries now. So as you know, the UK also applied for membership for CPTPP, which Hao mentioned earlier. So we want to do business with the globe, and the problem is there are tensions with regard to data governance issue. For example, in AI governance, we have to look into existing approach embedded in the UK AI strategy and UK digital strategy, where we focus more on accountability, transparency, explainability, and privacy, and all sorts of tensions with intellectual property protection, for example, between trade secrecy and data disclosure, and also Ha has already mentioned about whether data localization will be settled in nationally or internationally. So basically, the government has been really looking forward to entering into a CPTPP and has very close conversation with the current chair, a Japanese delegate. So they are really hoping that we can follow the pathway of Japan that can maintain a EU data adequacy position while still have a CPTPP membership. So when we look back to the WTO e-commerce negotiation, we see that although this progress has been extremely slow, but you can see that the WTO is also balancing different conflict of interest, cybersecurity and cyber sovereignty, and the rights or interests of different stakeholders. And most important of all is to what extent we can define and delineate the legitimate policy, public policy scope in different government regulatory power. As I mentioned earlier, my work has been primarily on intellectual property and regulation, and that's why I go back to the WTO TRIPS agreement, looking into what is the exception, the security exception. And basically, this national security exception in Article 73 is looking into mode of military or essential security interests. Literally, you can see really narrowly defined. And in the past few decades, basically, we don't really have seen much going on, or many cases trigger this exception. So it's more of a war of other emergency. And when we talk about this new kind of digital technologies such as AI, cybersecurity, or quantum computing, could we really use this article to claim national security? This is a big question. As I mentioned, that CPTPP accession to the UK will be a change of the world, really, because at a closer look, if you look at the CPTPP articles on personal information protection, this is privacy. This is really different from the European approach of privacy here. Although UK, we departed from the EU, but basically the privacy data protection level standard are still quite equivalent with the European GDPR. And then the requirement for free data flow in the CPTPP and GDPR is basically also contradictory. And you can see, again, the problem with Article 14.17, the ban of forced disclosure of source code of software. And this is still quite a big contentious point that the government and civil society are fighting about. And in the EUA Act, I mentioned, although we left the UK, already left EU, but still we want to still have the commonality and international alignment with the EUA Act. So it will still be a very good mirror for us to model. And the EUA Act explicitly exclude national security from the scope of AI regulation. So basically, it leaves all the member states the fully regulatory powers to deem or define what kind of national security it deems with regard to when it comes so close to AI regulation. But when we look into the AI Act, actually, it has been really using different concepts of security interchangeably or very fuzzily. So sometimes you use national security, sometimes you use cybersecurity, and at times there are economic security, and it also come across security and prosperity. So we can see that there is a chance that the national security concept in the traditional WTO TRIPS agreement, for example, that exception has been expanded and to include cybersecurity or even security and prosperity or economic security. And due to the time constraint, I'm not going to go through, I'm aware of the time limit here. So I'm just going to fly through the rest of my presentation. So the EU AI Act, as I mentioned earlier, is a different pro-innovation contextual approach. It has been criticized as a cutting red tape approach. Basically, government still is really keen to attract international investment in this area. But we still, although we already have AI strategy putting forward, but basically it's still fall onto different departments for different kind of legislation. For example, competition, data protection, human rights, and a specific sector, we have more of a stringent monitoring is financial services and medical products. And this national strategy, we have to also look into the recent enactment of National Security and Investment Act, which has been just coming into force in last year. And the government has enlarged, extended its power to screen and scrutinize business acquisition in 17 key sectors. Initially, it has quite a broad definition of AI, and then it cast the net too widely. So on consultation, the government narrowed down the definition of AI to 3 high-risk AI applications. So in terms of the 3 high-risk AI application, only those which identify objects, people, events, or have advanced robotics or involved with cybersecurity that will need government's prior approval to get the acquisition done. And you can see that the government has been very keen to protect its critical infrastructure and intellectual property. So with regard to the National Security and Investment Act, it basically applies not only to potential rivalry, but also their alliance. So, for example, there is a case, is the acquisition of a big stake in British Telecom from the French billionaire, and it was scrutinized by the government. And the other case is the chip manufacturing company in the Netherlands, Nexperia, who plan to already actually got a big share of the Welsh chip company, and then it was blocked by the government, and the government ordered that this business transactions needs to be stopped, and there is a divestment order. And I also mentioned to Jing that because I'm from Taiwan, and I'm also being aware of the possible update of national security law in Taiwan. Recently, also, there has been heightened tension between Taiwan and China, as you can see. And Taiwan, if you know, that it has a very important chip manufacturing industry. So it has always been a national security issue when you come across critical infrastructure and intellectual property protection of the chip wafer fabrication. So recently, the government has updated its National Security Act, and it provides more severe penalties for those know-hows that relate to core critical technologies of the domestic high-tech industry. Due to the previous economic spies from China, so the government has been very, very aware and alert to this kind of business activity. And there's a special act governing relationship between the people of the Taiwan area and the mainland area, and also look into strengthening penalties and of economic espionage when people steal trade secrets on critical technology. And I'll leave this to Han Wei, for example, because I understand Han Wei is also from Taiwan. So I think I was just briefly stop here because we can see still this is the start of the story, basically. In the digital age, we have a lot of conflicting values and conflicting regimes to really balance against each other. For example, as I mentioned, trade secret protection has been one of the key area that industry has been used for protecting their digital technology. But there is also a transparency, accountability in requirement in AI digital governance. And this kind of tension comes more apparent when you arise in the international trade deals, where we can see the different type of trade or data restrictions from data localization or source code disclosure. And another one is when we see more movement or more activity has been protected by trade secrets instead of the traditional patent disclosure, we can still see the problem with the argument of government industry argue that trade secrecy will protect their know-how, but for national security, for societal security, there is a case that more transparency, more disclosure will bring forward more security. So this is a two-sided sword. And the other thing to follow up is when we see more focus on trade secrecy protection, there's a detrimental effect on open innovation. For example, this kind of sensitive or critical technology has been protected by the trade secrecy umbrella. And obviously, we understand there is also vulnerability of cybersecurity and risk management issues. But what kind of effect it will bring to the cycle of open or closed innovation? And this is what I'm really interested in following up. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to hear from you or your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Phoebe. I fully agree. This is actually the beginning of the story. So before we receive any question, we haven't received any questions so far. So now let me hand over the floor to Han Wei. Han Wei is going to make some comments. Han Wei, the floor is yours. You are muted. You are mute. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so thank you very much, Anupam, Hart, and Phoebe for very, very interesting discussions about these very, very topical issues. And just have a very, very quick comment, not comments, maybe just a few ideas to share with. Okay, first, personally have no trouble using WeChat or Huawei handset, but many of my friends, especially those from in Taiwan now, and they have concerns about this because they always tease me like, whenever you make a joke through WeChat, the chances are President Xi is also enjoying exactly the same joke at the same time. And that argument goes to everywhere because whenever you use Xiaomi rice cooker, the chances are that Xi Jinping, the President Xi, would know what type of food you like to cook and when you cook. And also, when you drive a BYD, like the Chinese version of like Tesla, then the chances are President Xi would pretty much know where you're going right now. So the arguments can be extend as much as you can, but wait a minute. I fully agree on Professor Chander's arguments, the papers, that these concerns can be applied to everywhere, every country, every context. So if you look at Facebook, if you look at Twitter, and there's no secret that they are monitoring your activities. So Mark Zuckerberg can be everywhere as long as you are a Facebook user. So at the end of the day, I think it's a big question for everyone to think about what is national security and what are their normative implications for your country. And there are two levels to think about these issues. Like domestically, for those liberal democracies, we have to think about how can we draw a line between democracy to protect democracy while we protect our national security. Like, for instance, in the US context, if we shut down TikTok or other social medias, it's very likely it will violate the First Amendment right. And how can we manage these issues? And how can we prevent misinformation, disinformation, these issues to secure a more safety online environment? And globally, if every country plays the same game, play the card of national securities, how can the internet survive without being fragmented into different pieces? How can we maintain the resilience of a global trading system? Again, where can we draw the line, and what are the proxies can we detect protectionism? And what is protectionism? What is data protection, and what is data protectionism? And the traditional proxies like a necessity test or non-discrimination principles, they seem not very helpful. And at the end of the day, we have to think more a broader issue, which is to what extent should we defer to local preferences and accommodate different values in different jurisdictions? Because when we navigate these new emerging challenges posed by AI and other big data issues, then how should we react to them? And different countries, they might have different answers. How can we accommodate the global legal pluralisms while protect our national securities and maintain the global trading system? And I got a couple of questions for Hart and for Phoebe as well. And for Hart, I wonder, how do we kind of conceptualize the idea of cybersecurity in Vietnam? Because the political system is quite different, so it might be has a different kind of ideology about the concept of cybersecurity. And in terms of UK, I think one of the critical challenges for the UK government would be how can we make sure as we move forward to having a more comprehensive AI strategy, how can we check the global supply chain that this is all safe, this is kind of no risks when you set up your own AI system and there's no cybersecurity threat in that context. And moreover, I'm not sure if there is any like a T-Tech ban similar issues in the UK, and how UK government react to these issues, and what UK also kind of forced TikTok to divest and to transfer the shares to the UK companies. And if so, would that be violating any TRIPS agreements, or even violate, well, will trigger the expropriation kind of concerns under the UK-China bilateral investment treaty? Yeah, I think that's my quick comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess that we can give the floor to Ha and Phoebe. And we also have a question put on chat function. Yes. So let's address Han Wei's question first.
Thank you very much for your questions, Han Wei. I'm just going to quickly just share this slide so I can kind of talk through it. I think the key thing with cybersecurity in Vietnam, as I mentioned throughout my research, is maybe loosening the coupling of cybersecurity with national security a little bit. That this has only been a recent phenomenon when governments around the world are trying to grapple with the issues of cybersecurity. And because of their function as governance, they interpret cybersecurity as a national security matter. But before this discourse, it wasn't always about national security. You know, I've spoken about how industry players have always thought of cybersecurity as the technical issues, as more of an economic matter, making sure that the competition is there, making sure that businesses can secure the information. So it wasn't politicized before this. And if you kind of looking at the kind of social groups as well, it was also not necessarily a political matter. But in Vietnam, to answer your questions, Han Wei, at the moment, cybersecurity is political, and everything is a national security issues because it is a one-party system, and because the state is concerned. It can be concerned about anything. So the case that you were talking about, how, you know, a meme or even a joke could be a national security issue, it is like that in Vietnam at the moment. So people are quite hesitant to talk about cybersecurity, even use the term is quite, you know, provoke a little bit of anxiety around people. And the ways in which Vietnamese government has passed a very big law that, you know, prohibit all these different acts also gives people quite a bit of anxiety. So maybe, again, what I would kind of suggest from the findings of my research is to look back, like Anupa was talking about in the beginning, kind of look back at the story a little bit, that perhaps it's always not about national security, and how can we make space for all of these different perspectives and different voices to talk to each other, as well as finding the solutions that doesn't come into a headlock of democracy or security.
Thank you so much, Phoebe.
Okay, yes. Thanks, Han Wei, for your questions. The first one is regarding supply chain. I think being on the third party of US and China trade war, the UK or EU actually, we have been really cautious about our approach to China. So I think the government has been toughened up over the past 2 years to Huawei, for example, and there's a gradually phase out plan basically. And the government basically is now hoping to do business with like-minded countries, such as I mentioned, Japan, follow the Japanese model. And also, my understanding is that Japan also have recently adopted the Economic Security Act. And this would possibly be a future model for us to discuss and carry forward. And for your question about TikTok divestment, as I mentioned, the government's National Security and Investment Act, it identifies 17 critical tech industry or technologies. I don't think social media, such platforms such as TikTok or Google or YouTube is on that. So even AI previously was cast broader than the current version. It has to be narrowed down to specific applications that really have a direct, imminent threat on national security, and where the government can really intervene. So my short questions is, I don't think the government will move that to that direction.
Thank you so much. Now let's just quickly address the question on the chat. It was for Professor Shander and Dr. Lee, who talk more about the data portability and security, especially in the context of the Web3 and metaverse, which is indeed very very hot. How the US and UK react to it. So, Professor Shander, please.
So let me kind of respond by focusing on a related issue, but what's going on with the TikTok bans today. So as you are aware, states are compelling their government employees to remove the TikTok app if they had it on their government smartphones. And this has also been done at the national level in the United States. And one of the interesting things that TikTok is doing is creating a kind of what's called Project Texas to localize the data largely in Texas on Oracle servers, but also create a kind of Oracle firewall to the data. So that everything that passes through, that you can only leave that data island if Oracle approves, essentially. But at the same time, TikTok has to figure out how to keep interoperability with the global app so that Americans can talk to Canadians or Mexicans using the app. So it's crazy and very difficult to figure out how the internet functions. And Han-Wei's point about national security everywhere is really a fundamental point. So Paul Schwartz and I are working on a new paper, and that's kind of our concern. You can configure everything on the internet as a national security issue. And so everything becomes frightening. And with that view, Han-Wei began by saying, so that, every joke is understood by, is shared with President Xi, which is a great joke, by the way. I mean, the Taiwanese people are quite funny. That's a good one. But I think if we treat everything as a national security risk, we can't have a global internet anymore.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Phoebe, do you want to add a few words?
Yes, just Annapool, I look into some of the literature from America. Basically, government actually declared national security is economic security is national security issues. So basically, American has already made this pie extremely big. And they argue also in front of the WTO on the dispute on steel and aluminum. The domestic industry, when it comes to suffer, and it is a national security issue. So you can see this kind of argument already arising everywhere.
Okay, so thank you very much. We indeed go beyond a little bit our time, but I guess, use Phoebe's, I called Phoebe, this is not the end of the story. This actually is the beginning of the story. And also, as Ha mentioned that the field work, the interview that Ha has done actually demonstrated there are 3 different types of understanding of national security or cyber security, but, the current situation from, my observation, learning from our distinguished panelists is the cybersecurity has been highly politicalized, but the question, as Anapa mentioned, is if everything is essentially national security, will we have a global internet? So with this question, we are going to close here, and thank you very much for, you bear with us, your patience and your questions. Also, thank you very much for our distinguished panelists. We also thank you, University of Sydney, Monash University, American Society of International Law. Yes, yes. Okay, so bye-bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.